Hello, everyone. Welcome to everyone. While people are still coming into the chat here, let's go ahead and just get started. We apologize for, I know some people had a little bit of a difficulty getting admitted to the chat here, but it looks like everybody's coming in now. So we'll go ahead and get started. We at Unabridged are so excited tonight to host this event to celebrate the release of Harmada. Edgar has been a wonderful friend to Unabridged, and we're very excited to have you here to talk, and very excited to hear from Juan also. Just so everyone knows, we will have this video recorded, so if you miss a part of it or want to share later, that'll be posted. We also have plenty of copies of both of their books available, so if you haven't already purchased those, you're welcome to do that through the link that was sent out to you earlier. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a quick introduction about our writers here tonight, and also a little bit of information about the press. We're very excited to be supporting the book, and also Two Lines Press here. Two Lines is a press that is an award-winning press that's committed to publishing outstanding literature and translation. They specialize in exceptional new writing and overlooked classics that have not previously been published in English. So we're happy to have them around doing good work to bring us books like Harmada tonight. For those of you that have not read Edgar before, Edgar Garbelotto is a writer and translator who's born in Brazil and has been in the US for the past 20 years. He's translated Harmada here and also several other of the author's books, and as a writer himself, his most recent book is called Terra Incognita. And we're also excited to have this conversation with Juan tonight, who's also very familiar with Noll's work. Juan is a Colombian art critic, curator, translator, and the author of the novel Ornamental most recently. And it seems like they've both been chatting before we got in here and are excited to go. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to hear what you have to say.
Hello everyone.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here.
Thank you all. Thanks for hosting us and having us here talking about one of my favorite writers ever in Latin America, especially João Gilberto Noll. For me, it's a great pleasure being a part of Harmada's entrance to the US. And well, this is going to be a conversation between Edgar and me. And I don't know, Edgar, if you would like to start telling us very briefly, how the hell did you manage to translate this sweet piece of novel into this beautiful prose, beautiful, I mean, you've done such a great job with this. I was amazed because, I'm a translator too. And for me, it's been amazing. I had the chance to translate one of Noll's novels many years ago, like 10 years ago. It was one of his very short novels, the one called Hotel Atlántico. And I don't know if that's been translated into English yet, but I don't think so, right?
Yes, it has. Two Lines Press also published it.
Yeah. Okay. And I had the chance to do that many years ago, and it was a real challenge as a translator, because we were just talking before starting the conversation, live conversation, about this fake simplicity of Noll's prose, how Noll toys with this very interesting games he makes with the Portuguese syntax. And I would like to start asking you about this experience as a translator. I mean, English is your second language. You've done extraordinary work with it, and well, what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I'm doing what is normally not done in the translation world. Usually, you translate into a native language. But I've been in the US for 20 years, and I felt comfortable enough to take on this project, mainly because I fell in love with Noll's prose. And since the first moment when I came across his work, in my head, I was already like trying to imagine how I would transpose that weird syntax and that sometimes confusing language into English. As you know, Portuguese is a very poetic language, and it allows a lot of subjectivity. And in English being such a objective language, let's say, it was definitely a challenge. It was a challenge when I was. It was a challenge that I wanted to embrace, but I never actually thought that would come to fruition, because I never thought that I would translate him. And finally, when I was pursuing my MFA and taking literary translation classes, then I went back to like trying to remember authors that I like to translate, and then I definitely narrowed down to Noll, because of the difficulty, because of the challenge, and because I wanted to see how it would sound in English. So that was my first motivation. So yes, I was definitely driven by the language, the challenge of working with the language initially, but then the more I dug into Noll's work, I became obsessed with his very, very strange fictional world. And in the process of translating it, many times I felt almost like possessed by some kind of a strange force that guided me, because I was not really sure many times what he was trying to say. But after several readings and after discussing with many different people, then I started realizing, okay, this is even deeper than I thought. It has so many layers and so many different types of interpretation. Okay, that was a long answer to your question.
No, but I mean, we're here to hear your answer. So, yeah. You know, back in those days when I had to translate this Hotel Atlántico, I was living in Madrid, and João Gilberto Noll just happened to spend a few days in the place I was living at that moment, and which is it's called the Residencia de Estudiantes, which is a cultural institution in Spain. I used to live there I had this scholarship, and I spent a couple of years living there. So Noll was there while I was translating his book. So it was a real weird experience, because I had the chance to have breakfast with him a couple of times. I mean, this is kind of very, very, I don't know, maybe corny telling you all this.
No, I'm jealous.
But
I'm jealous that you met him.
But you know, I don't like to talk about this specific, you know, anecdotes or anything. But in this case, I mean, I think this story is relevant, because I really had this experience of sitting with him at breakfast 2 times and having lunch with him twice as well. And he was a very quiet man. He was a very thoughtful. He really had you there waiting for his answer, you know? Like every time you ask him something, he didn't, I mean, he was never interested in you know, in asking you something or starting a conversation. It was really hard being there. You were asking him, I don't know, things about his work, and he would just wait like 1,000 years to answer you. And yeah. But at the same, it was very uncomfortable at first, but then you kind of, you know, get used to his rhythm, because it's a matter of rhythm in the end. And what were you gonna say?
No, he was very famous for those long pauses, and he was definitely, like, I guess, let's say the typical writers, had a typical writer personality, very, well, at least some kind of a romantic idea we have of writers from maybe another era where they were very somber and very silent and very difficult to read. It's interesting because his prose can be considered also difficult to read, right? So he is critically acclaimed, and he has won many awards in Brazil. He's probably the most awarded writer.
Yeah.
And I was just doing, if I do like a quick Google search, there are like hundreds of PhD and master's theses written about his work. Why I'm saying all this, because I think his prose has definitely all these different layers where you can see that there is a man behind the language trying to find something, trying to find a way to justify his own existence. And in this case of Harmada, more in particular, I think there's a lot of meditation on the role, let's say, of the artist, or the role of
Sure.
the role that his stories have in our lives. And at the same time, in this particular book, I feel there is a questioning of, or at least the question is raised about the impossibility of narrating the lived experience. It's funny, like comments that I have heard about the novel, like all the things that you learn in writing classes, he does absolutely the opposite. He builds scene upon scenes without really following an arc of the scene. And so he piles up scene after scene, not concluding anything, not having any moral of the story. It's just like a sequence of narrations that just provoke thoughts and emotions without ever concluding anything. Until we get to the mid of the book, where he starts talking about the process of narrating. And I'm going to read a very quick paragraph that kind of summarizes what I'm trying to say. He says something like, okay, this is the meat of the book. It's just to give you some background. Until this point in the book, we have this narrator or protagonist that literally raises out of the mud, and he starts like living very surreal experiences. He goes swimming in a river with a man, and the man disappears. Then suddenly he's in a bar, and then suddenly he's in a hotel participating in an orgy. And there's like all these random scenes up to this point in the bit of the novel. And then when we get here, we kind of settle into a place. And this place is called the Shelter. But it looks much more like a mental institution. Most people there are older. He's the younger, although he's in his 50s. And then, important detail, he ended up in this shelter after an earthquake. There is an earthquake, and he ends up in this shelter with nothing. And then suddenly he starts narrating his stories. And these stories kind of are so fascinating to the people there because people have absolutely nothing. So they start holding on to his stories. And that kind of made him like a god or like an artist. And then he started like getting all cocky about this new found glory, let's say. And then, okay, let me just then, I'm going many directions, sorry. But let me just read this quick paragraph. Mm-hmm. I never prepared my narratives beforehand. They mostly came out spontaneously. The course of the plot's unfolding was realized right there in the act of uttering. I hated to think about what I was going to say in advance. I always let my speech lead me, that's all. And my speech has never let me down. On the contrary, it has always known how to take me toward unexpected and wondrous incidents. The narrative was a fluid I emitted thinly toward a world still unknown, where all stories were protected from oblivion's rotten air and safely stored in an archive of time.
That's great.
What do you think, Juan, about this? I mean, in the sense of simplifying how Noll approach to narrative is.
Well, you'll see. I wrote like 3 pages of notes reading your translation, but I don't want to bore you guys with reading all this stuff. And maybe I'll just write an essay later. But I certainly would like to share a few ideas, a few theories or hypotheses I have about Noll and about what you've done here.
Yeah.
And and it has to do a lot with what you've read. I mean, this part, no. I remember the first time I read one of Noll's novels. I really thought, oh, this is amazing. Everything is a purple patch, you know. Everything is a transition. Everything is there is no big scenes. You know, this is like just a transition for a big scene. No, everything is just a transition and a transition, and after a transition, you know, you keep finding purple patches just attached to one another, and which is fascinating. And I think that that has a lot to do with what Noll is trying to propose. I don't know if from a very conscious theoretical approach, but just simply as a practice, you know, in his writing. But I think Noll is giving a big response both to realism and non-realist aesthetics. Let me try to explain this in a very few examples. I think that we all tend to forget um, how I mean, we tend to forget that realist devices are there, you know? I mean, we conceive every story from a realist point of view because we are living after the realist Big Bang from the 19th century. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And every non-realist alternative that emerged in the 19th and 20th century was, in the end, a certain response to those realist devices created in literature for, I mean, think about, I think there are, I've identified 3 responses to realism that are still, I mean, they're still there, you know? The first one would be the Kafkian one, you know? The other one would be a purely or surrealist, purely fantastic surrealist approach to non-realist aesthetics. And the third one is Borges, or Borges' proposal. I think those are the 3 main huge currents of non-realist aesthetics. And uh, think about what Kafka is doing in the Metamorphoses. You know, the Metamorphoses is not the story of a guy who becomes an insect. It's just the story of how the narrative of daily life of this Gregor Samsa guy becomes very transfigured by the fantastic event of he becoming an insect, you know, because in the end Kafka is employing all uh, the you know the techniques invented by realism, you know, especially description. Kafka is just applying all this stuff into his transfiguration of realist modes, you know. On the second hand, we have this purely fantastic surrealist approach, and this approach is still dependent on realism, even for denying its own rules. You know, I mean, by trying to be completely apart from realist, it's kind of, you know, it's a kind of way to reaffirm realist devices. You know, and the third one is Borges. Borges' way is a manner to conceive realism as just one more genre, you know. In that manner, he just establishes no, he doesn't give it a special place of in the modes of representation. You know, there's these 3 main currents of non-realist aesthetics in literature today, and I really would bet, excuse my French, would bet my ass if you can take a non-realist story and you cannot relate it to one of these 3 currents, or maybe a combination of them, you know. And here's where Noll arrives, and here's where you, Edgar, arrive in a very as Noll's translator, because Noll is going to propose, let's say, a 4 way of non-realist approach, I would say. And he proposes a tension, you know? He's not combining, he's just creating a tension. You were just saying this moment of, you were just reading this passage of Noll where he theorizes about the thing he's doing, telling us these stories, no? And there's just a few passages. I will ask you to read a couple of them just as soon as I finish this long dissertation. Please excuse me, but I'm just gonna finish right now, and I'm just gonna say that this tension that Noll is trying to propose with non-realist aesthetics is very interesting, and you can see just transparently in this novel and in all of them. But here it's just transparent what I'm trying to say, and it's this idea of literature is proposing a conjectural mode. You know, it's all a conjecture. It's not real, but it's real at the same time. You know, it's just conjectural. Reality is in a state of radical contingency, and he's just showing you this in this chain of events, this chain of incredible adventures. And I think that your translation, I was saying that your translation is amazing because your translation permits to see that. The translation permits to see that tension, you know, to perceive how language is just dealing with reality and non-realist proposals or approaches. Excuse me if I was just too long, but
No,
I really wanted to say this. And
no, it's interesting. You just gave us a lesson in literature coming all the way from Kafka, where I definitely think that Noll have swum on those waters for sure. But basically what you're saying that Noll, it's a fourth
a non-realist way
a fourth type of approach to non-realism. I see your point, and I think we also have to contextualize Noll within his time and space, right? So at the end of the day, he was a Latin American writer living on the fringes of society, and I say that because I was just reading about his biography that is coming out in Brazil, and the biographer just gave me a first access to it. And it's interesting to see that this is a guy who tried to really fit into society. He tried to have a job. He tried to make money. He didn't succeed in any of this. And then at some point he said, fuck it, I'm just gonna, dedicate my life to literature. And he pretty much decided by doing that in Latin America, he made a choice of living a marginal life. Yes, he was praised by the critics, but he sold very little. He was never a popular writer because his prose, his fiction is really strange. So in that sense, yes, it is strange because he is writing about reality in a very surreal way. And that's why the comparison, here in the West, there is this comparison to David Lynch, which is interesting, right? Because David Lynch is it's a filmmaker, not a writer. But it's interesting that there's always this comparison, Noll's world compared to David Lynch's world, in the sense that, yes, it is real. We recognize everything. We recognize houses and streets and people and the way people behave. But all this is always bathed with a very, very strange way of, bathed with a very, very strange light. And always, people are always, or his narrators are always looking at the world in a very, very strange way, without being cliche, right? Because that's the other thing about Noll, is that in any moment we see sentimentality. He's not appealing to our pity or our tears. Everything is very matter of fact, but in a very, very distorted way of looking at reality.
Yeah, and he's also, I would say he's cruel. I would say his aesthetic is just very cruel, and but not in
Rule?
a cruel. Yeah, there's cruelty, and
In which way?
well, but I'm not saying like cruelty in a very like negative way, but just um, events just happen in a way that is so natural. You know, is the cruelty of nature.
Without
Is the
without
cruelty of time.
without the allegories of fiction?
I don't know. Maybe it's because, well, uh, you know, there's one. I think David Lynch is a great comparison. I think is a it has a lot in common with Noll Lynch, in the sense that, I mean, in Lynch almost everything is a purple patch. You know, everything is just a transition. There's this force of events. There's this force of time and this force of nature, this organic bodily force, um, and coming through language and just making things happen. And so that's why I was saying that maybe cruelty is not the right word, but this is just the one. I was thinking about Antonin Artaud and his cruelty theater, and that's why I was thinking about.
Yeah, no,
Well,
it's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I can see the use of the word cruelty here in the sense of yeah, he doesn't hold back, right? He shows, even when it comes you mentioned body, I think there is definitely it's his all his stories, all his thematics are always, there's always a very strong relation to bodies. So there's always a lot of fluids and there's a lot of yeah, the corporeal element is very present in
Mhm.
his fiction because that's the way we experience life, right? So we are, yes, we are in the world thinking and feeling things, but we also have our bodies fitting into the world. We are always touching and we have our own fluids, and that's how I think how Noll's characters experience the world too, very tactically. Um, yeah,
Sure, sure. There's certainly a biological aspect to his writing. I mean, like, I remember the beginning of one of his latest novels, the one called Afagos e Azenos. How is it
Afagos
called?
e Acenos,
Afagos
yes.
e Azenos. See,
Yeah.
I don't know if it hasn't been translated in English. I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
there's a
But
project for with two lines to possibly translate it. Yes, that was the
okay.
first book I read, by the way, from
Oh,
Noll.
that's
Yeah,
good.
and was sorry, I interrupted you. I just want to tell you a quick
No, no, no.
story
Go ahead.
that
Go ahead,
that
please. Go
was
ahead.
on this book. That was the first. I was already living the West. In one of my trips back to Brazil, I came across this book. I have heard of Noll, but I guess because I was living the West, I kind of disconnected. But that was the first book that I had in my hands, and I started reading. And I remember the feeling of it was a mix of disgust and wonder, and because I have never read anything like that, I never knew that it was possible to write that way in a way that was so explicit. He didn't hold back, and that's why I think your comment about cruelty comes in, because yes, writers write fiction and it's all allegoric and it's all formulaic, let's say. But here there was a writer that was proposing a language and an approach to subjects that was totally um, shocking.
Yeah.
It made me uncomfortable reading what I was reading, especially on that book where um, I guess the exploration of sexuality is the main theme on that book. And in a time where we were not even talking about the things we talk today about gender fluidity and all those things that are very present in the conversation today. But at that time, so 15 years ago, we have characters that were changing bodies males becoming females, females turning into animals, and animals turning back into males. It was I mean, that's just one example of the places he was going, where I at that time, and I still to this day, I rarely see writers going. And yeah, to your point, the point you're trying to make, the link you were making before with Kafka has it's very pertinent, because that's possibly the only link I can make with Noll's approach to fiction, Kafka, and I would say also Clarice Lispector in terms of thematics and approach to language.
Yeah, definitely Clarice is well, he told me so. One of the few answers he gave me when I asked him about Clarice, and he immediately answered. He said, well, she's a genius. She's one of my, masters. And
Yeah, and actually, yeah, in many interviews he said that it was not only Clarice Lispector his main influence, but he said a particular book from Clarice Lispector called "The Passion According to GH."
GH.
On that, so that book is pretty much one scene, right? It's one woman going to the maid's bedroom and confronting a cockroach.
Yeah.
So that's the entire novel. So the trip is definitely inside her head. Nothing really happens. So he said that was probably the book that influenced him most, that made him realize, okay, I can write like this as well. And it's funny because I was saying that, when I read Acenos e Afagos, which in English would be something like hugs and cuddles or nuds and cuddles. So when I read that, I had the same feeling. Okay, oof, it is possible to write like this.
Yeah.
For a writer, that's like, when you have those encounters, it's just so revealing.
Well, I'm not afraid to reveal that for me, Noll's discovery was like Santa Claus. I mean, he was the guy who came with the presents. I didn't know it. Like I had read Clarice before, but definitely Noll really helped me to build my own writing. But I was just wondering if you remember the opening scene of this Hugs and Cuddles.
I do. I do, because I translated.
This kind of this kind of a fight, this which is, they're making love, they're fighting. What the hell is happening here?
Yeah.
Those bodies, the contact, the description of those bodies, they're fighting or making love or both at the same time. Really impressed me a lot. But well, I'm gonna ask you to read a very short part, which is page 16. Right.
Why don't you read it?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, just read it.
Okay. It's just page 16. It says, yeah. I stayed like this. I stayed still like that for quite a while, thinking about what had happened, trying to take stock of those events, wondering if my memory was indeed composed of real events, by facts that surfaced in the seconds and minutes of that still not so late night, or whether it was all the result of a brief collapse between the appearance of things and the intimate reality of things, that nothing was actually quite what it seemed. The crippled man had not disappeared, perhaps he hadn't even existed. I didn't know what I was doing near the flowing river. Underneath that starry sky, that moon, probably nothing even existed. Maybe it was all a mental secretion originating in whatever ingrained motivations I had in me. And I think, well, there's so much to talk here, but I think this is one of those parts of the book where he kind of throws you a clue, he just hints at the, you sort of a glimpse of the conceptual structure underlying this whole project, you know. And this is a very revealing part, I think, of what we're trying to say here about Noll's procedures and Noll's idea of what literature is doing, you know. This thing of what happens, you know, which is a very Clarice Lispector question, I would say. There was another text that I know Noll really liked by Clarice Lispector, which was this very short story called the Egg and the Chicken, it's a very similar structure to that of the Passion according to GH, which is this woman just gets in the kitchen and she sees an egg and starts this confrontation between this body, this woman's body, and the egg, and the whole story is just about it, you know. And this question of what is really happening, you know, which is both a realist question and a non-realist one, you know, both at the same time. Yeah.
The interesting thing is that a lot happens, actually. If you think about this short novel, 160 pages, so much has happened. So much happens, scene after scene after scene, and sometimes we jump in time years within a paragraph. So he's very like. He writes in a way where he doesn't want to waste time. He doesn't want to waste our times in details that don't matter. Details sometimes are just mentioned in passing. He really wants to tell the story. And I think that's a very maybe Latin American approach to fiction. And you as a Latin American writer, maybe you can help me here. Do you think that's a characteristic of a Latin American fiction, that it's much more telling than showing, let's say? What do you think about that? Compared to, let's say, a more American or English tradition of
showing and don't telling?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think we are more discursive. We could say that.
Okay, discursive. Okay.
Yeah, in a way, you know, but at the same time, we have also absorbed all these North American influences.
Yeah,
you know?
That is true. And Noll loved the United States. He was here working. He was. I was writing workshop early in his career, or he was not even writing in Brazil, but he was at Iowa, and then he came as a guest to teach at Berkeley. Mm-hmm. That's where he wrote a book called Berkeley in Bellagio, because it was a fellowship that took him to California and then to Italy. So there's always mentions of American movies in his fiction. And I read in one of his interviews that he was more influenced by movies than by literature. And it's interesting because his literature is very scenic. You have scenes after scenes moving really fast, and so much happens. If you think about what this narrator goes through in this novel, I mean, he goes through everything. He's born from the mud, and then he lives in a shelter for years, and then he starts being a theater director. Then he goes from total poverty to starting having some money, but then that money doesn't bring him really happiness. So then he adopts this this girl who he trains her to be an actress. She becomes successful. She leaves him. Then he's alone in this city called Harmada, which is of course, fictional land. Anyway, I'm just giving examples of all the things that happen in this novel, and it happened in a very, very fast pace.
But at the same time, there's this incredible succession of adventures and everything, and weird things happening. But I think that Noll was really aware of, you know, that he wasn't doing surrealism. In what sense? Surrealist novels are just an unceasing chain of extraordinary events, but there is no tension there. Just one marvel and one wonder after the other, but there is never this tension. And tension is a word I really is the only word I can come up with talking about Noll's procedure of keeping you there, you know, not only assuming that this is just a random you know, flow of events. It's not random. There is something there. There is a meaning, and there is a direction, at least. There is a pulse of desire. There is a pulse of bodies. There is a pulse of nature. There is a pulse of social relations happening in a very particular way, being shown there. And there's power relations, which is a thing we haven't talked about, and I really wanted to ask you about this, because I think Noll is a very political writer, in a very peculiar sense, I would say, because there is always power involved, and there are always the appearance of these institutions, you know, in every novel. Here we have the shelter, but also you have the theater, and you have, you know, he used to be an actor, and the characters, he confesses at some point that he used to be an actor. He just goes back to Harmada, and he wants to become an actor again, or a theater director. And but I really wanted to ask you about this aspect of Noll. Do you conceive him as a political writer or not?
Yeah, political, maybe not in the not in like well, if you think that Brazil for 20 years we lived under military dictatorship, right? So Noll's 20s and 30s were spent living under that dictatorship. By the time Noll publishes his first book in 1980, we are at the end of the dictatorial regime in Brazil. So in the beginning of his career, yes, there is some kind of explicit message against dictatorship. But then I think there is slowly as Brazil becomes democratic and becomes very industrialized and urbanized very quickly, we also see then Noll's transformation into a much more well, political in a different way, much more political. I would say the politics of the body.
Sure.
And that's why there is so much. There's so much about sexuality.
Yeah.
I think in his books. And not only sexuality, but like using the body as a political vessel.
Yeah, sure. And well, you've just read his biography, and I was wondering if it's true what they say, that he was just he was sent to a mental institution when he was very young. Was it true?
Yeah, he was
during the dictatorship, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he really suffered the you know, in his own body.
Yeah, I think we all did, right?
Yeah,
we all suffer. I mean, 20 years of a military regime where you could not be an artist. That it was horrible. That left a horrible scar in everyone that I mean, I was a kid, I was a boy in the 70s, but I remember how, you know, we were brainwashed in school to have to, like, you know, honor military people. It was horrible. I mean, anyway, the point is that yes, he definitely was cooked into that in that environment. But it's interesting to see that as he gets older and as Brazil also changes, and let's say Brazil becomes more like a global, right? Because yes, he's Brazilian. He was born in Brazil, but at the same time, we live now in such a global world, right? Where
Yeah.
being born in Brazil, it's almost like a detail in your biography. And so what I'm trying to say is that he became less and less Brazilian and much more universal, and his stories are universal. No wonder why he's being translated in many languages, because even in Armada, this is even more explicit, because he doesn't mention any country here.
Yeah.
This is a literally fictional country. It could be anywhere. It could be in the United States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia. The experiences that this character goes through are experiences that any human in the global village, let's say, are can experience, and more particularly the artist. There's definitely here a metafictional aspect. This narrator is contemplating, questioning the function of art and the function of the artist in society.
Yeah. Well, there's another aspect we haven't talked about, and it's identity, which is we just mentioned a few elements of this topic, but I think it's a very crucial one regarding Noll's work, because sometimes it all seems like a very profound interrogation on what identity is and how it works in our world, especially in our contemporary world. You were talking about this global village and everything, and I think that Noll's novels are just unthinkable without this global context of sudden, quick, brutal, violent transformation of the conditions we're living in from an ecological, social, economic point of view. And I think his characters, which are unnamed characters, lost characters, fugitive, they're always on the run. And I asked him once if he liked North by Northwest, Hitchcock movie, and he said he loved it. And I said, this is the most similar thing I've ever read to one of your, I've found to any of your novels. This guy who just keeps running the whole movie. There's this absurd scene. Every time I see it, it's just like, Jesus, what time did Hitchcock thought about it? Like at this plane trying to kill him is the most stupid way to kill a person. Like this plane going through the cornfields and trying to kill this guy. How? I don't know. And but yes, this idea of identity in a work like this, that was something else I was really interested in.
Yeah, the point you made about all his characters are in transition and they're always running from something towards something that they don't know. That's always present in his novels, yes. And my interpretation is that by putting characters on those situations, Noll was exploring the vulnerabilities of the human being, right? Because when we travel, we feel that way, right? We are getting out of our comfort zone, and in this case, they are travelers, wanderers, except that they have nothing. Have you noticed, like, all his characters are really poor, so they can be as ex-actors, or in the case of Lord, which I translated to, he was a professor, but he was completely poor.
Yeah.
And And it's funny because that is somehow the life that Noll has lived. And I think, nowadays it's fashionable to talk about autofiction, but I think Noll was already doing that even before the term existed or was used. All his characters are reflections of his own um, reality and surreality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Edgar, we have time for a couple of questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Maybe one is interested
Oh
in.
my God, yes. I was not looking at that. Sorry, guys. Sorry, questions.
We have just a couple in here that I'm gonna, I think we've touched on these a little bit, but Charlie says Noll's composition style, going where the story took him without regard for the realistic conventions, reminds me a little of the methods of Cesar Ara, who also looks at social relations. Are there any other similarities between the two, or does Ara's reliance on different genre conventions make him a totally different kind of writer?
I'll let you can you answer that one? Because I have read areas but just like
Just a
half of
few.
one book.
Well, I think this is a very, very pertinent intervention by Charlie Ovendorf, because I think that Ida is like the lost twin. Ida is like Noll's lost twin. But I would say there's a difference. There's a crucial difference between Ida and Noll. They both played with this non-realist agenda, being very conscious of what realist and non-realist traditions are constructed. How are they constructed? But I would say Ida has a different element, which is Ida is just so in depth with Borges, and Borges' procedures and Borges' way to conceive literature as a total artifice, and so Ida decides to be Borgesian in the sense that he just deals with literature and literature, the narration itself as a pure artifice. And I'm not very sure if Noll would agree with that. I mean, I think Noll was really convinced that literature is not a pure artifice. I think he was convinced that literature has a really profound effect on reality, on our perception, and on our daily life even. No, I think I would say Noll was a little bit more of a mystic writer, and Ida is not. Ida is just pure Borges. He believes just in literature's pure fictional device. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the messages here quickly.
Yeah. There's another. Maybe.
Well, Charlie was happy with your answer.
Okay.
We also have another question. I think you've touched on this one also, but maybe to help us wrap up, you can answer. Peter says, I love the discussion about non-realism. There's an irony that travels along with that. It's a direct contrast to our current culture, which says things are as they are, but that's another illusion, and yet folks do not recognize it for that. What do you think Noll would have to say about our current claims to realism and facts?
Oh, Peter, we need another hour to answer that.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Wow, that's a very complex question.
That one's for you, Edgar.
No, that was not for me. No, I don't think it's for me. I think it's for you.
I don't know. I really try to answer that when I just make this huge dissertation on realism and non-realist aesthetics, but I don't know. I don't know what would Noll say, but definitely we're still living in a world that conceives stories from a realist point of view, from this realist paradigm. We're still there. So that's why these non-realist aesthetics are so interesting in the last 2 centuries, because we're still dealing with these problems that we have inherited from realism. and this claim that we of literature as a sort of device that permits us to see reality, which is kind of strange, which is really strange, you know, because back in Greek in the 5th century before Christ, no one would have ever said that, you know, like these novels are for reflecting reality. That's just inconceivable for anyone else except for us after the 19th century, you know. So we're still dealing with all these things. That's why we're trying. That's why I'm babbling, because you know, there's not much to theorize about it. I don't know.
I know Peter. I'll talk to Peter about this one over coffee.
I guess maybe that's one that after folks read the book, maybe they can chime in.
Exactly, yeah. Well, he told me he got the book, so we have a lot to talk. And from Michael Holtman here, interesting. Michael Holtman from Two Lines Press saying that the scene that Juan was talking about on Hugs and Cuddles, it's coming up on the Calico issue. Calico is a project by Two Lines Press. So I translated this first scene that Juan was talking about, and it's going to come up next year, fall 2021.
Amazing.
Making my sales pitch here.
We've also got Michael to thank for another sales pitch. He's included in the chat a link to our website where you can purchase a copy of Harmada if you haven't already. If you got an email invitation to this event, there's also a link that you can do that there. And of course, we would love that if you would support a bookstore, support these authors by purchasing the book. I want to say thank you to both of you. Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Juan, for sharing tonight for this conversation. And thank you so much for the work that you do as writers and translators for bringing us books like Harmada. We're very grateful for that. Also, a word to Two Lines Press and to Coffee House Press for the work that they do to support and publish works like this. We're very grateful, and we at Unabridged love supporting them also. So yeah, thank you all for joining us tonight. We're so grateful to have had this conversation, even in a virtual space. If you have any questions about these books or about the presses that we've mentioned tonight, you can always just hit a reply to the email that was sent out earlier, and we'll be happy to get you in touch. Did you guys have anything else you want to add tonight before we adjourn?
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Unabridged, for being awesome. Thank you, Juan, and everybody here.
Thank you all, and congratulations to Two Lines Press for doing this. This is just amazing. Thank you very much, Edgar. I really had a great time talking to you, and thank you all.
Stay safe, everyone.
Wonderful. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.